Hello guys, welcome to our next lesson here. We're going to be talking about complex numbers. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the operations of adding and subtracting complex numbers and multiplying complex numbers. In the previous lessons, we talked a lot about how to handle powers of I and what to do when we need to raise I to like the second or the third power. So we're going to take care of the other operations here when we talk about adding and subtracting and multiplying. So that way, again, if we run into complex numbers, we know what to do with them and how to handle them, just like any other number that we might use. Okay. So just a couple of things to note when you're adding and subtracting complex numbers. All right. Make sure you combine like terms. Okay, so whenever you see an I, right, so for instance, like if you do I plus I, it's the same thing as 2I, much like you do with x's. So like if you have x plus x, you're going to say that's 2x, or if you do 3x times 2x, you get 6x squared. It works out the same way with i's, okay? And the other thing is you're going to see some situations where you need to distribute the negative. This is something that students commonly forget to do. So for instance, if you had something like what you see down here in part B, this negative that is outside of the parentheses needs to be distributed to each term inside of that parentheses before you go and combine like terms. Okay, so these are just things to watch out for. So you'll know when you are done with the problem when you combine like terms, you've distributed the negatives and eliminated all of the parentheses. Okay, when you multiply complex numbers, all right, you're going to want to make sure you use a generic rectangle. So use a generic rectangle and then simplify any powers. And you'll see what this means here in just a second. So if you have any powers of I, you need to simplify that using what we learned in the previous lessons. Okay, so when I say generic rectangle, we're talking about this thing. We usually use it to factor. Okay, we've used it in the past also to multiply things like with x's. We can use it to also multiply things with i's. Okay, let's take a look at a few examples. All right, so part A. All right, so first thing you want to do, we have a 3 plus I, we have a 5 plus 2I. They're in parentheses, and I'm taking note of the operation that is in between these parentheses. This is addition. All right, there are no numbers outside of the parentheses here, so we get to assume that they are both ones, which actually makes the parentheses unnecessary, because if I distribute a 1, nothing inside the parentheses is going to change. So I can just rewrite this as 3 plus I plus, and then 5 plus 2I. So just like that. And then I go through and I combine like terms. So for instance, the 3 and the 5 can be combined because they are both constant terms, right? So they would combine to be 8. And then I have I and 2I, which gives me a grand total of 3I. There you go. That's all there is to it. I have combined like terms. I got rid of the parentheses. We're good. All right, now let's take a look at part B. Again, note the operation in between the parentheses here. It's a subtraction, okay, which means we need to distribute that negative sign or that subtraction sign to each term inside of the parentheses. So I'm just going to go left to right here. Starting with this first one, there's a 1 outside of this parentheses. So I'm just going to say 3 plus I. And then when I distribute the negative to the 5, I'll get minus 5. And then the negative to the 2I becomes minus 2I. So now the parentheses are gone. I'm free to combine like terms. So I have a positive 3, negative 5. That combines to give me a negative 2. And then I have a positive I and a negative 2I. So that's going to combine to give me negative 1I. And there's my final answer for part B. I have removed the parentheses and I combined like terms. All right, let's try it again. So here my operation is an addition. So I'm looking outside of the parentheses. There's no numbers outside of the parentheses here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove them. So I've got 2 plus 5I plus 1 minus I. Okay? And then combine like terms. The 2 and the 1 combine to give me a 3. 5i and negative I combine to give me a positive 4i. That's it. We're good there. All right. One more with a negative. Let's see what we got. We've got a minus on the outside, so I'm going to make sure I draw my distribution signs there because I don't want to forget to do that. So this first one has a 1 on the outside, so this is just going to be 2 plus 5i. And then here we're going to have minus 1, right, because the negative distributes, and then negative to a negative here, right? It's a negative to a negative I, so that'll become plus I. Right? And then I combine like terms. So I have a 2 and a negative 1. That combines to give me a positive 1. This becomes 5i and another positive I, so this will be 1 plus 6i. And that completes that problem. Okay. All right, now 2 problems down here at the bottom. We've got 3 plus 2i and 5 plus 2i, but notice in between the parentheses there is nothing there. There's no operation that is indicated, so we get to assume it's multiplication. So if there's nothing there, it means multiply. Okay, so to do that, I got to use my generic rectangle. So let me show you what this looks like with complex numbers. Okay, so I'm going to draw a generic rectangle with 4 boxes, just like we always do. And I'm going to take this first complex number, 3 plus I, and I'm going to put it along the side, just like that. Then this one, the 5 plus 2i, I'll put it across the top. And then I'm going to go through and multiply each box, just like we have in the past, right? So 3 times 5 is 15. We'll do 3 times 2i, which is 6i. And then 5 times I is 5i. And then I times 2i is 2i squared. And then we add the 4 boxes together. So we'll have 15 plus, these two are like terms, so 6i and 5i would be 11i, and then I have 2i squared. Okay, so it looks pretty good. We're almost there. The only thing is we have this I squared, and you have to remember your powers of I. Remember what I said above. So once you multiply and use your generic rectangle, you need to settle any powers of I. Well, this is a power of I, and we know that I squared is negative 1. So this is really 15 plus 11i plus 2 times negative 1. Okay, so this, I can simplify it a little bit more. So become 15 plus 11i minus 2. When I multiply that, we get a negative 2. And then I can combine like terms. So I've got 15 and negative 2. So that'll be 13 plus 11i. And that will be my final answer there. Okay. So let's try it one more time here with part F. Again, we've got another multiply. So I'm going to set up a generic rectangle. I'm going to put the 2 plus 5i down the side. We've got a 1 minus I here along the top. Then I'll go through and multiply. So 2 times 1 is 2. We got negative 2i. We'll have a 5i here, right? 1 times 5i. And then 5i times negative I is negative 5i squared. So there's my 4 terms. I just got to add them together. So I've got 2, and then negative 2 and positive 5i here will combine to give me a 3i. And then I've got minus 5i squared. Just like in the last problem, that I squared is going to turn into a negative 1. So I've got 2 plus 3i minus 5 times negative 1. Then when I multiply those, it's like a negative 5 times a negative 1, so that'll turn into a positive 5. So I've got 2 plus 3i plus 5, and then I can combine the 2 and the 5. So this becomes 7 plus 3i. All right, so that's adding, subtracting, and multiplying right there. It's 3 new operations with complex numbers that we hadn't looked at before. So hopefully that helps out. The next thing we're going to talk about here is what's called conjugates. Let me check how much time we got here. Actually, we'll save the conjugate stuff for tomorrow or for the next lesson since we're at the 10-minute mark. I think that's enough for today. So try the exercises. I'm not going to post a discussion today since this is really just a skill-based thing. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. But make sure you do think about these types of things. You could probably go through and use your multiplication skills and your addition skills to just do these, and note that these are conjugates, and we'll talk about specifically what conjugates are in the next lesson. All right, guys, have a great day.